Everybody, welcome to Beard of Darkness Book Reviews. I'm feeling extra dark today, guys. As many of you know, I haven't been doing a lot of these, and I'm used to doing a lot of them. So I've just been so excited, not only just since I've known that I was going to talk to this gentleman, but even more so that I get to. I've been spending a lot of time with authors lately, and I'm really excited. How are you? Well, for you, this afternoon, Mr. Napper.
Oh, hello. Thank you. How am I today? Fine. Yeah,
I'm sure.
It's 1 o'clock on the I'm 1 o'clock in the future. I'm in the next day.
Yeah. So you know he's in Australia, so he is tomorrow at 1 p.m. That was one of those things too. It's like when you start a channel, it's or anything where you talk with people in different time zones. It's one of the, it just kind of like hits you with the left hook, right? There, I would say New Zealand, Australia, are the two hardest to plan interviews with because for some reason my brain knows we're everywhere. You know the time difference everywhere else. For some reason, those two seem to be more difficult. But I'm so glad you're here.
It's a pain for any kind of interview like this. The only time it's good is when because my publisher's in London, and so they gave me a deadline. But what'll happen is even if they give me it's a really short deadline, I'll have about 1 o'clock. What is it? I think it's. Oh, I've got my times mixed up. I should know by now because I've had 3 days.
9 p.m. It's 2 a.m. for them.
Yeah. So I have a few hours during the day when I've got a deadline, and the last 3 days I've just finished, but I had to put up a big time in London on one of my screens, and I was working to opening a business their time, so it was 9 in the morning their time, and so I worked all day to get the edits done for a novella that's going to come out later this year. So normally it's terrible, but it's only good and it is annoying when they send me something in the middle of the day and it's urgent and it's midnight for me. And I'm like, oh man, I just want my work day to finish. Stop.
That's, so I don't know if you have children. I do. I have 4 very young children. And if somebody pokes me and says, hey, I need you to do something at midnight, I'm like, I'm probably throwing some fists. You know what I mean? So I get that, man. That's part of the story. That's part of your story. It's so cool because there's a lot of things in your day to day, obviously, because I'm not a writer, that is so much different from my day to day. And that we kind of touched a little bit before we started talking here live. I'm just after that learning, that difference in our life, whether it's culture or jobs or career or just those different nuances. So I love to hear those little tidbits. I call them little nuggets of gold because they give us an insight to, us as humans. It's very cool. We have some people shouting out. I just want to throw them up there. Tim, we had Christopher D. Brand, my guy, Neil Montague, my guy. Timothy Wolf, warm rain. Yeah, dude, I think you're in New York. That's right. I'm in Ohio, so we're having pretty similar weather. Honestly, I thought my house was falling down last night. The wind was crazy. We have lots of pine trees by our house, and the pine cones kept just knocking on our steel roof. And I woke up a little afraid a couple times, not gonna lie. It was pretty intense. Another Australian, lovely guy, Charlie Cavendish, wonderful reviewer, bragging over there about how it's 97. And see though, Charlie, I know that's nice, okay? I guess maybe once or twice a year, but 97, dude, that's way too hot for me. And of course, I'm speaking in Fahrenheit because us Americans, for some reason, won't switch to the metric system. Hopefully one day.
In bad summers here in Canberra, it's over 100 for like a month. It's gross.
Yeah, exactly. That's the perfect word for it. I lived in Florida for a little while, and in the States, it gets pretty hot there, and a couple other places. But really, when you think of like hot, humid weather, you think of Florida in the U.S. And I was just sickened by you would like wake up at 7 in the morning and just be drenched. But yeah, I'm cool with that. But I'm glad you guys are having the wonderful weather because it's crap here. Just cold and rainy. But hey, I would love to get started with. Well, we'll start with where I started, if that's okay with you. This wonderful collection of short stories, which I have to say, it's hard for me to keep this dust cover on because this is the best quality naked hardback I've ever felt. I don't know what you guys did, but that is just
I don't either.
else.
Adrian at Grimdark, who you interviewed, he's the you'd call him an independent publisher, but he organized all that, and it's fantastic. Yeah,
it's got to feel like I've never felt it on a hardback before. It's a little bit grippy, but at the same time, it's soft. And it's beautiful. I would have a hard time choosing, like if I had to make one decision to keep the dust cover on or to leave it off like permanently forever, I would have a hard choice. But would you give us like, for those who don't know about Neon Leviathan, which like I said, is excellent. It was my first taste into Cyberpunk, which I still don't know 100% what Cyberpunk means. And we'll kind of get into that here in a little bit. But would you give us like a general overview, the genre, the subgenre? Give us the spiel, if you will.
for Neon Leviathan or for Cyberpunk?
Yep. Neon Leviathan. Yep.
So Neon Leviathan, as you say, it's Cyberpunk. It's I think it's 12 stories. In the blurb, I say 12 stories featuring the outsiders, and I think that's true. It's set in Australia. It's set throughout Southeast Asia. So I definitely took on board the advice of writing what you know. Of course, it's science fiction, so you can't know the future, but you can make plausible. I think you can make plausible future histories when you're writing a story, and you write the things you want to know about as well. So anything that fascinated me, I tried to include in the stories. So it is cyberpunk, and so how would I describe the collection? I think it's very dark. I think it's very humanist. I think it's looking at human struggle with the forces of whether it's governments or corporations that are trying to strip away our humanity, our rights, our personhood. It's looking at the individual within that. And it's quite bleak, but I think I do try to also have that spark of human rebellion that's always of the type of character who will remain unbroken despite the context they're in. Now, in that collection, a couple of characters, I should say, do get broken by the end, but and so that's part of it thematically, but other parts of it, it's hard to talk about short story collection because they're quite varied and they're vignettes. But the collection actually begun. The collection came about in part because I was trying to understand the world I was building. So I started a novel when I started writing. It was terrible. I went back to basics, and one of the basics was, how does this world work? Yeah. What are the geopolitics? What are the energy systems? Everything the day to day, I wanted to understand how it worked first. And so it's a faster way to get there was the short story, because you could build a brick by brick. You could build this world. And I think also a good thing about the short story is that it teaches you the craft of writing. And I think it teaches you the craft of writing faster than a novel does, because this obviously it varies from author to author, but the thing about short stories is you go through that cycle of of writing the story, of getting it critiqued, of getting it rejected. That all can happen relatively quickly, whereas of course with the novel that can take years, especially in traditional publishing. It takes years and years. So I went through that cycle of rejection and improvement and self-analysis and learning how to, and the great thing about the short story is you learn how to do certain things efficiently and elegantly, introducing a character, building a world, setting a scene, making a reader care. If you can make a reader care in 5,000 words, you can absolutely make them care in a novel, I think.
I think I can agree with that quite a bit as a reader.
Yeah. And so what I was going to say was so it has the deeper thematic issues, but it also has the stuff I want to read. So it has some of the stories have some high octane action. Some of the stories have mind bending tech that makes you question the nature of reality. So it has, I want to have my mind blown when I'm reading a story. Well, that's one of the things I like, probably because I read a lot of Philip K. Dick when I was young. And some of the time I want to do that for the reader. I want them to go when they get to the ending of one of the tales.
Yeah, I have to say, as a very new, a brief history. I did not grow up reading. I did not think that I would be a reader as an adult. I was the guy that just would have told you you're crazy. One thing led to another. I found myself wanting to take those adventures, and I couldn't physically. I picked up a book, and it's just been to the races since then. Fantasy and sci-fi is where I started, and where my love is. But I feel like Cyberpunk, now that I've experienced it somewhat, and honestly, pretty deeply, because I really enjoyed the humanistic part of it. I enjoyed the dark elements. I always enjoy those because I think they're very telling of the human, condition. Even the really dark stuff. It's like I can pick parts of that story and kind of understand where that person was coming from, that character. Sometimes the author too, if I have spoken with them and their influences as well. So Cyberpunk was very new to me. In fact, you were the very first Cyberpunk author that I ever read. And I was pleasantly surprised at how much I enjoyed it. The futuristic, Asian inspired, correct me if I'm wrong, but Asian inspired is kind of what came to my mind.
Well, I was living in Vietnam, and when I wrote many of the stories, and I worked in Southeast Asia for about a decade. Before I became a writer, I was an aid worker, so I lived in the region and worked in the region. And I think it's you can't help but be influenced by setting wherever you're living in the world. And because I started writing late compared to most authors I know, and I never conceived that I would ever be one. This is not until my sort of early 30s, I think. When I started writing, as I said, I was living in Vietnam, so that heavily influenced, as you can see from the collection. But for my debut novel, 36 Streets, is set in Vietnam. So setting is a huge influence.
I'm glad you kind of touched a little bit on 36 Streets. Because again, I've read the Neon Leviathan, really enjoyed it, but part of that is talking to other fans of yours, Adrian, Charlie Cavendish, who's over here in the chat, who has talked. He's like, yes, my man Charlie. Yes, thank you for being here, Charlie. He's like, I really enjoyed Neon Leviathan, but check out 36 Streets. So not only just for me, or not only just for the viewers, if they haven't got the scoop into 36 Streets, but I'm kind of being a little selfish because I want to know more about it. I purposely didn't do a bunch of research because I kind of wanted to hear it from you. Kind of the same question, but 36 Streets. Maybe a little bit of an overview and kind of what went into your writing, your inspirations.
For the debut, well, I mean, it's similar, like what they say, write what you love. And my interests are, Southeast Asia and as I said before, the unchecked power of governments and corporations, and I love focusing on the outsiders, but I also love the cool tech, as I said, and I also love a book that that sort of catapults you through the narrative. So you're turning the pages. So if you mush all those things together, which I did, cyberpunk is probably the best subgenre. 36 Streets. 36 Streets is another name, or the old name, for the old quarter in Hanoi. The 36 Streets are the 36 guilds, the original guilds that they started. This was 5,000 years ago that they built the city on. But it's 36 Streets is kind of a cool noirish name. That's one of but it's also set there. So I obviously was influenced by setting. I was influenced by, you can't help but be influenced by the history of that country, and which has been kind of the pawn of great empires. It's been invaded by every superpower just about forever, from China and then through to the French, the Americans, the Japanese. So they've got this history of colonialism, but they've got this history of rebellion as well. That was an interesting. So I have a futuristic Vietnam where China occupies it, but of course that's the background, or that's integral to the world building. But then there's the character, who again is a gangster. She's an outsider. She ends up getting involved. She gets asked to solve a murder, and then she gets pulled into a conspiracy. Ooh. And like any good cyberpunk, it has, so this book has gangsters, gunfights, martial arts, military occupation, the mind-bending tech, but it also has some deeper themes there. I hope, what I like to do is play a kind of a double game when I write. And I think good science fiction plays this game, is where you read something and you find it thrilling, say, and you get immersed in the world. And then when you put the book down, it stays with you. And then a few days later, you're still thinking about it and some of the issues that came up. I really love books that can do that. And again, so I try to, whether I succeed is another thing, but that's what I try and do with a short story or with a novel. And I think a really good example of this is, I don't know if you've watched it, but have you seen Ghost in the Shell, the anime from 96? Okay. So Ghost in the Shell it has these really interesting ruminations on the nature of the human spirit. It's a very existential film, but it's also got these iconic action set pieces. It's gorgeous to look at. And Ghost in the Shell is an 80-minute movie. So it does all of this. It condenses it all in to this one experience. And it does it so elegantly and efficiently. So I think Ghost in the Shell, if any of your listeners are fans of that, is certainly a very strong influence on me and how I think about storytelling.
I have, that's one I have to definitely watch. I think the only
sorry, I just saw some comments. Yeah, I'm talking about the anime from, I think it's 96. I'm not talking about the live action.
Okay, so that's great to know, because I want to watch this soon. And I would have been looking for something modern. Awesome. Tim said they made a movie. Okay, that's what you're talking about, was the movie.
Yeah, there's a Scarlett Johansson version, but I do think the Japanese anime from 96 is excellent.
Awesome.
92, sorry, someone's corrected me, 92.
The researcher and E.L. Montague. All right. So I don't know the context of this, but I'm going to throw it up because I'm sure it's solid. What about Akira? I don't know what that means, but do you know?
Oh, this says 1995. I just Googled it. I cheated. We were both wrong. Sorry, what was the question, mate? See, this is the problem with comments that I said before that we started, that I would get distracted.
Oh no, that's all good. He said, "How about Akira?" I don't know what that is as far as context.
Yeah, that's the classic. That's considered by many to be the first of the Japanese cyberpunk films, and that has imagery in it that has been very influential. I think that's 1988. I think, and that's certainly worth seeing as well.
So I have seen this. Timothy Wolf says Cowboy Bebop was the show for me. So
Yeah,
I had
this
a
is. I've
buddy.
got a Cowboy Bebop shirt on.
Yes. So it's funny, man, because I had a buddy that I played football with in high school. He was always reading the books or the graphic novels, right? And I was like always kind of really looking up to him for some reason because he's going from the back to the front. They read different, right? And for some reason that interested me. And then Netflix did this thing where they come out with an adaptation, and I have no clue how close it is to the books, the graphic novels. Probably never will find out. I enjoy Cyberpunk. I don't know how deep I can get into a graphic novel. I want to because I feel like those graphic novel fans are those very passionate, even more so. I'm very passionate about fantasy and sci-fi, but you get a good graphic novel, diehard graphic novel lover, and it's like it's a whole nother world.
Yeah, I'm not.
So
I'm not as. I read quite a lot of graphic novels. I'm not as deeply into them as some. I think that the older Judge Dredd comics aspects of that were very cyberpunk. If you ever read Judge Dredd, but the big influence. It's an interest. Cyberpunk's a fascinating medium because fascinating subgenre because some of its most important influences are visual in film. So, of course, there's the classic Neuromancer, which is kind of the foundation text of Cyberpunk by William Gibson. But what's interesting about Cyberpunk is that it's probably it might be the most visual literary subgenre, and so if you think about Blade Runner and how iconic that is, and Ghost in the Shell and these other ones, so you are very conscious of that as an author to try and you can't ever replicate the screen, but you do have to have that aesthetic within your book.
I was going to say, and I thought I was going to sound really off by saying it, so I hadn't said it yet. But you just reiterated it, so I'm going to say it. I feel brave enough to say it now. Thank you. It's like if I see a cyberpunk movie or your cover for Neon Leviathan really screams cyberpunk. I feel like I could show you what that looks like. I would have a hard time describing what that is. So it kind of plays into a question of mine. What are some rules or what are some things that you would say cyberpunk's all about? What would really, you get what I'm asking is kind of,
yeah.
what
No, I
rules
wrote I did this as part of a PhD. So
I saw that.
I could, in fact, I am a doctor of cyberpunk because I did get my doctorate.
I saw where you wrote that in your website. I'm so glad you touched on that.
But I won't give you the dissertation. I think it is when you get down to it, no genre or subgenre is actually simple to define. But William Gibson called cyberpunk high tech, low life. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Because what the cyberpunks were doing was sort of pushing back. They were doing many things, but one of the things they were doing is pushing back the idea that all progress was positive, that every technological invention was good or a positive. What they were looking at, and so when you say high tech, low life, you're looking at the fringes of society in a high tech world. You're looking at the losers rather than the winners. And in a cyberpunk society, most of us are the losers. Most of us are being left out. So, but what I do for defining cyberpunk, I go to the punk. I can go a couple of different ways, but I'll take the punk angle. So what is punk? Punk is anti-corporate, anti-corporation. Sometimes it's even anti-capitalist. Punk is anti-elite. Punk is countercultural. Punk can be offensive to people of all political sides, if they want
anarchy
to
fall into that?
I think anarchist is different again. I don't think because anarchists are also they are trying to posit an alternative political system, whereas punks are rebelling against conformity, oppression, dehumanization, whatever it may be. I don't know if punks have an alternative world view, that an alternative ideal society necessarily. Punk is always standing with the marginalized. I think punk, as the name suggests, is defiant. So I sometimes say cyberpunk is the literature of defiance. And if it contains these sort of thematic components for me, and you have this dystopian, sometimes nearish future, but not always, world, you've got the neon and the rain, etc., etc. You've got the components of cyberpunk, but thematically, I think that rebellious part of it is important. I think the other thing about cyberpunk is very often there's no happy endings, but if you want to take something from it, that's whether, if there's hope, if I can say that, what you take from it is that usually there's a protagonist who refuses, as I said before with these short stories, who refuses to be broken, and they have their own moral code. However flawed they are, however opaque their morality, they refuse and resist to be part of this system of power. And so it's small acts of rebellion rather than some sort of hero's journey, happy ending where the tyrants are overthrown. It's finding this space for defiance within it.
I love that, and I'm glad that you went into a lot of detail, because it makes so much sense to me hearing that from you, because you've got the rebellious, no happy endings. And when I just very novice, if I was to try to describe it to somebody, I would say as the dark, like vision that kind of looks over top those who maybe in life didn't get I wouldn't say chances, because opportunities, that's a deep theme in itself. But I really liked what you said, that it makes more sense, because again, I'm kind of having a hard time describing it, but that rebellious nature with the dark themes, the high tech, but on the fringes of society, in these little acts of kind of going against the man is what I would kind of say as a novice. So thank you for kind of going in that. I was looking at your website, by the way. I have it down here on my ticker, guys. And man, Mr. Napper, you just have such a visually beautiful website, but there's also writing tips, and there's some awards kind of going into it, because I absolutely love to look at the awards, man, because all writers who get awards, I think you guys deserve to hear people shouting about it. There's the bibliography, there's his novels, and there's so much more. So you guys should check it out. Now I'm going to make you blush. So Mr. T.R. Napper is the winner of, I hope I'm saying this right, Aurealis or Aurealis? Aurealis award for in 2022 for Best Science Fiction Novel, 36 Streets in 2022. Winner of the Ditmar Award 2022 Best Novel, 36 Streets. Winner of the ACT Nobel Awards in 2020 for the fiction category with Neon Leviathan.
That was cool, because I beat the literary types. That wasn't just a genre award. That was everything. So I beat the poets. I beat the domestic realists. I beat the memoirists. I beat them all with Cyberpunk.
Yes, and I can see just like that. It kind of has a full circle feeling to me. As a writer, and you kind of talked about when we first started, you started writing a little bit later, which is very much going to be my story if I continue to have this passion to write. How was it? I don't know what these awards, if it's something that you go to and you kind of sit in an audience, or what it is, if they send you a letter. But how did it feel when you found out that you won that whole section in the fiction category?
The Aurealis Awards are Australia's premier awards, man. So to win one of them is huge, and it's juried as well. And yes, they have a proper. You go there and you sit in the audience, and you have the whole it's Australia. It's not too formal. You know, you have the speakers come out and they present the awards, and you get your trophy and you do a speech. The Aurealis for best novel is probably, it has to be in the top 3 highlights of my career. That was
Wow.
really, I think, partly because if we want to talk a little bit about the writing process and the publishing process.
Yes.
It was because that book was so hard to get out. I won't do the full story, but I had an agent an agent in the UK, and he had another book of mine that he couldn't sell. And then the next book I gave him after that was 36 Streets. And in my career, I haven't had that many beta readers be malicious. Probably 3.
Wow.
But he was maliciously, I would say, borderline abusive about how much he hated 36 Streets.
Wow.
And it was devastating for me at the time because I don't even know if I had Neon Leviathan out by then. So, maybe I did, but what I didn't have is a traditional publishing deal. And if you want to get one in the UK or the US, like in Australia, maybe you don't have to, but your audience is so much smaller here in Australia. But if you want a traditional publishing deal in the UK or the US, you need almost always an agent. So I was kind of devastated. I've written this on my website, so I don't mind saying it again. But he said to me, the last lines of his email were, "Whatever led you to believe that anyone would wish to waste 10 hours of their life reading this book?"
Oh my gosh.
Which was brutal, man.
Dude.
And so I was thunderstruck by that. But I kind of put up with it for a while and didn't know what to do, because I saw him as my ticket to a career. But you don't need that bullshit in your life. So I dumped him.
Oof.
And then I got another agent who loved the book. And then it found a publisher. It did find the last one. So it got rejected by like 15 There's not that many big sort of first or second tier publishers left. There's maybe only 15 these days. There used to be a lot more. Yeah. They all rejected it by the very last one, which was Titan. And here's a book that one agent hated, that everyone else rejected, has now earned out. So if for your listeners or viewers, I should say, you get your advance in this business, and most books don't earn out. So you get your money that they can't take away. So they give you 10 grand and your book earns 7 grand. You keep the 10 grand, but you haven't earned out. So 30% of books earn out, I've been told. 30% of authors. So 36 Streets earned out, and now I'm getting royalties for it. And it won the most prestigious science fiction award in Australia, and like critically reviewed, and not just in Australia, but internationally, it's been very well reviewed critically. And it just goes to show you, I'm saying all this not to boast, I'm saying all this because it just goes to show you how brutal this business can be, but also how much dogged persistence is something that, and a thick skin is something that you need to have. Because you have all these barriers in place, and yet the line between success and failure is so fine. I could have quit that book, and most people would have. Not most people, I don't know if that's true, but a lot of people would have quit at that point.
A lot of people would have quit, yes.
And I stuck with it because I believed in the story. And now it's found readers. And it's found readers mainly outside of Australia. It's found readers mainly in the States and mainly in the UK.
I don't know if I've had a more profound story told on my channel. It really hits home as far as, personally, a lot of the morals and my foundation and that tenacity to believe in what you're doing. If you're doing it for the right reason and you're passionate about it, then how can you fail? Man, really, that really moved me, honestly, because I can imagine. So can I ask, this agent or the guy that was being really malicious, did he reach back out to you, or have you kind of talked to him after that email?
No, I probably shouldn't talk about it. I mean, it's
Okay.
it's in the past now. I've never heard from
Sure.
him again. It was, I don't want to out him or anything.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I think what
Uh,
I'm trying to get to is
if
that
you're saying, did he come back and say I was wrong? No, and he should have.
yeah. So
But
I
it
guess
doesn't
what I
matter.
was asking.
I've got the right agent now, and I've got the right publisher, so it's fine. Yeah.
No, that's amazing. And I wasn't getting toward any malicious part of that. What I was trying to say is I think that if I was an agent or somebody who was subjective on, somebody's work, maybe I would feel a little different. And maybe I guess the bottom of what I'm trying to say is I respect the love that you had for your story, the belief that you had in your story, and the tenacity that you had to keep going with it. That's truly inspiring. That's really what I'm trying to say, man. So thank you for sharing that, dude. That is absolutely one of the coolest things I've ever heard.
And sorry, I was just about to say that. So in your comments, if you don't mind my pointing it out, but Tim
Absolutely.
Mackay has said, "When do you give up?" Because I never did on that particular story. It's an excellent question, and this is one of the hardest skills to learn as a writer: is knowing when something isn't salvageable. And I had I had 3 novels actually that didn't get published. So 36 Streets with the 4th. Yeah. The first 2 were not salvageable. I can't even remember what they were about anymore.
Wow. Okay.
And the thing about I know my mindset at the time was when I did my first novel, that's such a huge achievement just to finish it, right?
Ooh.
You do 100,000 words or 90,000 words or whatever it is, and you're proud of it and you finished it and it's a complete story. And then the thought that it's not good enough doesn't enter your mind. Now, a lot of people publish their first novel. Not a lot. Some people publish their first novels. Some people famously, I think Ian M. Banks, who's just an amazing author, I believe he got his 12th or 13th published, I think.
Wow.
So he stuck with it for that long. So that's another example of that dogged persistence. But it's one of the skills, and it's such a fine-tuned thing, and it's not, I can't express rules for it, but you do need to be aware when a novel's not, or a story's not working. Now, I've got a book that I've had in my hard drive for 2 years, and I still can't decide. It's another Cyberpunk novel, and I have to go back to it again and see if I want to try and get it published. So it's there's no blueprint in this business for success, for writing. You can try and emulate what other people do, but maybe that's not right because you and as individual have your own path as well in this business. So in answer to Tim's question, I can't tell you. you have to have that judgment call yourself, and that's something you have to. It's a writing skill you have to develop. When is a book good? When is a scene good? When is a character good? And that just comes over time.
So tell me if I'm wrong, because I definitely haven't been through this. You get to a point in writing where technically you can look back and be objective. Also, the passion, the love, the time you put into the story also coincides with that objective part of writing. And we all have that inner intuition, right? Maybe that has a little bit to play with it too.
The inner intuition. I got distracted by the bloody comments again. I've just turned them
So
off.
good. No. So I guess what I was trying to say is like we have that. You say you write a story you're truly passionate about, but it's your first book. You may not objectively know if this is a solid book. You've never had an editor tell you some of the things that you're not so strong at, this and that.
Yeah.
After a while, you get this objective muscle, right? And it's building, and you get to look at your own
Yeah.
novel objectively.
Well, you made a couple of good points. One is that you need readers, and those readers can sometimes, if they're good, like as I said, I don't mind negative feedback if it's constructive. In fact, I think sometimes that's the best because it tells you where your weaknesses are. But the other thing, so that's one part. One part of it is finding good readers, and it's really important to have that as a writer. So I do know some writers who are at the point where they just don't use them anymore, but I certainly have probably 4 or 5 people I rely on, whose judgment I really trust to read my work before I send it to my agent. The other thing I do is, and this is a specific thing to my writing process, is I let books or stories sit for some time. So a short story I might let sit for months, weeks or months, and I'll put it aside and reread it. But a novel I might let sit for a year, sometimes more, before I give it to my agent. Or I really need to give it time to sit. And for my brain, the creative brain's a fascinating entity because it's always working, and the subroutines are always working, and you're dreaming about it, and you might be walking. And so I find that after, say, 6 months or a year, say it's a year, my brain has done a lot of thinking in some subroutine, and I'll get to the book again, and sometimes I'll think of things during the year that I want to change, and sometimes it'll be I reread it and go, this is good, but this needs improvement. So that's another, for me, that's the other part. Now, I know there's other writers out there whose first draft is really good. I think you said you had Mark Lawrence on this show.
Yeah.
I think he's one of them because I've heard him talk about his craft before, and he was talking about he can't understand people who do multiple edits.
He's
I'm one of them.
Brilliant anyway. It's like
I think sorry, I don't want to verbal him. I think he was talking about someone who did like 100 edits. Maybe that is too much, but
that may seem a little obsessive.
Yeah, you do. So that's another skill, is when to stop editing. But it just really depends on what you're capable of putting out there on the page,
Man, I think that what you've said so far as just about your own personal journey, I always say that about every author. It's like I find myself typing that same thing, like when I'm going to talk to an author about. But it's what I'm after, is that personal journey. Because every single author is going to have that different variables, So those are the little pieces of gold that I absolutely love when somebody talks about. So I appreciate all these little nuances that you're talking about, because it kind of goes back to what you like to write about. It's that human part of everything we do. It's you can't miss it. It's always there. I would love to ask you, were you always a reader, from like a young age? Or was it a little bit later, like myself? I was 29 before I really read like my first book and loved it. And who were some of those foundational authors?
Was I always a big reader? Yes. I was a voracious reader. I didn't come from an artistic family, or a family of readers. I come from a working class family, so it wasn't as though there were lots of books in the house, but I had that. I don't know why, but I was a voracious reader from a very young age, and I kind of, even then, I had an obsession with books. Even then, I would sit in front of my bookshelf and I just look at the spines.
Oh, dude!
And,
so I'm not crazy.
No, you're not crazy.
Okay.
No. That, and you'd be just, because there's all these worlds in there, and you just, in a way, you're in awe of the written word, and I think that's a good thing. I've called it that bookshelf is the altar for the imagination. But what I never did, despite being a voracious reader, never ever thought about being a writer, and not even in the sense of, I didn't even go, oh, wouldn't it be cool to write a book? I didn't even have that thought, didn't pass through my head. Not until I was in my kind of early 30s and I'd had a career as an aid worker. And why it suddenly got into my head, I don't know. But I had some time. I was probably a bit burnt out. Aid work is a profession with a lot of burnout. So I had 3 years. My wife had a job in Vietnam for 3 years, and I was just and my eldest, I should say, was 12 months old then. So I was taking care of him, and I had 3 years where the first time in my life I didn't have a full-time job. And I thought, oh, well, I've been thinking about writing, so I'm just going to throw myself into it for 3 years. And my deal was, of course, taking care of a young child is a job.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to, but as you know, it's unpaid labor. But so I threw myself into that for 3 years. And the deal was with myself that if at the end of 3 years I've done something worthwhile or I've been published, I might stick with it. If after 3 years I've gone nowhere and maybe I don't have I don't know if there's talent or whatever it is, I'll just go back to my previous career. But in fact, in my mind, I was going to do both. I was going to have my aid worker career and being a writer. But at the end of the 3 years, I had a couple of things published, and I might have won one award, and I just had enough success to inspire me to keep going.
Wow.
And then I really threw into it, and then I just stuck with it after that.
I love that. And so, who were some of those? Do you have any specific authors?
I didn't answer your question. Yeah. So, who are the authors? The most influential. I mean, I read. Young. I read the Belgariad and all those sorts of epic fantasy series. I read all of them, but the ones that were influences. The first book that really blew me away was a short story collection by Philip K. Dick, called what's it called? The Days of Perky Pat.
Which the Days of Perky Patton?
Pat. P-A-T. The Days of Perky Pat. So that was my first, but that was when I was 12 or something. So I think Philip K. Dick has remained an influence on me. I think that I think 1984 was a big influence. So George Orwell, but also his essays. I think Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed is I think it's probably the best representation of an anarchist society ever in literature. And because
what was that series? I'm sorry.
It's not a series. It's just a single book called The Dispossessed.
The Dispossessed. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
And one of the reasons it's so good is Le Guin has enough intellectual and creative integrity that she also points out all the flaws in an anarchist society as well as what would be good about it. And there's two. I think it's a long time since I read it, but I think there's a moon and there's a planet, and the planet is capitalist and the moon is anarchist.
Wow!
But the Dispossessed. So I think that was an influence on me. I think I came across Dashiell Hammett a bit late. So he's a hard-boiled fiction writer. He really, in a way, really is the instigator of the hardboiled genre of fiction. So Dashiell Hammett, Maltese Falcon, that sort of stuff is a huge influence. He's a very literary writer, but he's a science fiction writer now, and that's Kazuo Ishiguro. And he wrote, he's great. So he wrote What Remains of the Day, but his science fiction is Never Let Me Go and Clara and the Sun, and he wrote a fantasy novel, The Buried Giant. I don't know if his ideas have probably influenced me a bit.
Never Let Me Go is high on my TBR. It won the Nobel Peace Prize, right?
Well, no, he won it for all of his work.
Okay.
So it's for a body of work, but certainly that's yes. But the other answer is yes, because that's part of his body of work. So yeah.
Oh, I got to check that out. I love that. So there's Philip K. Dick, Ursula Le Guin. These are names that I've heard of. But being, that I'm more of I know more modern fantasy and sci-fi writers than I do a little bit older. I cherish these because lately I've got these things on my TBR that are modern again, and I want to dive back into some of these inspirations such as those who inspired you, and many other authors. Like, who's another like Terry Pratchett? I haven't I don't necessarily think that Discworld's going to be like my thing, but having that in my repertoire of having read some different variances of fantasy will help. So I love these recommendations. One of my favorite questions to ask because I always get such a different answer from everybody. So appreciate that. Do any of these authors particularly come through in the way that you write? If not any of these, have you noticed that anybody's prose has kind of made that lasting impression on you that you maybe noticed through your own prose?
This is a really difficult question because sometimes you deliberately try to imitate a style, but mostly I think you're probably subconsciously influenced. I think that purely in terms of style, like the construction of a sentence in a paragraph, I think Hammett was quite a big influence, because what he showed is that you can have a short sentence, can be elegant, but it can contain layers and layers. And it can be, you could have a paragraph that could have, on the surface is one thing, but it's actually dense like a neutron star with resonances. And I love that. That's such, see, what's that saying? I think it might have been Oscar Wilde who wrote in a letter to a friend, "Sorry, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one." Because being able to write efficiently and with a spare use of language and still convey the same meaning is far more difficult.
I have never heard that, but that makes so much sense.
Yeah. So I do, and that also helps with short stories as well.
Oh, for sure.
So probably him, but probably
that's a hard one. I know.
It is a hard one because, for example, there's a Vietnamese writer called Bao Ninh who wrote a book. His only novel is called The Sorrow of War. But that really influenced my understanding of Vietnam, for example. But Orwell's 1984 obviously was influenced my thinking on how language is power. And Ishiguro talks about memory a lot, but the other thing that's influenced my writing, as I said earlier, is cyberpunk is such a visual genre. So non-literary sources have been a huge influence as well. So like Blade Runner, as I said, and Ghost in the Shell, I think have been quite influential.
So there's a couple of things. I've seen parts of Blade Runner, but not in a time when I was really young, where I could appreciate what you're, saying about it. I'm going to go back and watch that. And Ghost in a Shell or Ghost in the Shell?
Ghost in the Shell.
Okay. Definitely going to go back. Seeing and hearing that is a huge influence in the cyberpunk area. I can't wait to check that out. Now, you've kind of touched on it a little bit. And when I talked to Adrian, he touched on it. And I kind of been saving it because I feel like it's something that, at least from what Adrian and you had talked about and he said about it, was a really important part of your life. Working as an aid worker, some of the nicest things I've ever heard from one person about another human was Adrian talking about that kind of work that you did. If you're comfortable going into it, what kind of things did you kind of experience?
So I did it a few different places, but for example, in when I was in Laos, I ran a huge education program, basic education program, and that was school construction. That was in very remote areas. So it was a program that built 500 schools, clean water, textbooks, getting the teachers. It's basically every fundamental of a basic education was part of the project in areas that had never had it before. School meals, for example. So because the places we worked in were so impoverished, families, say they had 3 kids, right? So what they couldn't afford to send all 3 kids to school because they wouldn't eat. So one of the kids, let's say they're 8, had to work. Yeah.
Wow.
So one of the things we did is a school meals program. So the kids will get a meal when they go to school, but if they stick with school for the year or the semester, they get a whole bunch of food they can take home to their families as well. So it's an incentive. Yeah, it's an incentive scheme. Initially it was aimed at girls because girls were often the ones that were kept out of school, but in the end we opened up to everyone. And so those sorts of programs are life-changing. So if you take a young girl who from an ethnic minority group in a remote area has 0 years of education compared to 5, just 5. If she has 5 years of education, she's half as likely to die in childbirth. Her child is twice as likely to survive. Her child is twice as likely for themselves to be literate. They earn so much more money. They have far fewer children. So they might have 5. If you have no kids, you might have 5. If you have no kids, if you have no education in this context, you might have 5 children. But if you have 5 years, you'll have 2. This is on average.
Sure.
Because these girls have more choices and have more choices over their own body, for example. So, but it's good for boys as well. It was doing very similar, very positive things. For example, boys who have 5 years of basic education are far less likely to be recruited as child soldiers, for example. So education was my calling, and I thought I was going to be doing that for my career. I thought, this is it. I found it. But as I said, I got burnt out after about a decade, and then I found a second calling in writing. But I've done weird stuff as well. Like I worked in Mongolia for a year as a volunteer. This is when I was quite young, and I was working with street kids, and it was a very much, again, a poverty alleviation program. But I also I used to write there was a local news. There was one English language newspaper, right? And so I used to write joking summaries, pretending I was a sports reporter of cricket, because the expat community would play cricket on an abandoned baseball stadium. The Americans had gone in and built a baseball stadium for the Mongolians, but the Mongolians didn't play baseball, so it was just abandoned. So we turned it into a cricket ground, and it was like they picked the guys from the Indian restaurant and random volunteers and random foreigners, and some Mongolians would play cricket every weekend, and I would do a write-up for the paper. And they loved it so much they made me their cricket correspondent.
That's awesome.
I got like half the back page every Saturday or Sunday of a cricket where it was the game, but I'd be very florid, and I'd be like, and the champion cricketer walked out into the pitch and blah, blah, blah. All this nonsense.
Yeah. You kind of played it up to where it kind of is very emotional. I love that.
Yeah. So technically, I was a cricket correspondent in Mongolia.
Who has that on their resume, dude? That's awesome. So I have to say, Matt over at Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews, one of the reasons I started the channel, love his channel, he, for a job, does research, opposition research, but I don't feel like that's what he's using right now for political reasons in his job. But what he does, in fact, I was thinking about him today, Matt. I want you to know this. I was thinking about how long it's been since you've done this. So tell me how far he had to dig to get this question. Yeah, what is the most reliable poker tell you pick up on?
Yeah, that is. Wow, he has done his research.
Dude, he does.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I used to be what you call semi-professional poker player, which is I derive a portion of my income from poker. It kind of stopped with COVID, and I haven't really got back into it since. What's the most reliable poker tell? The most reliable is there's a super obvious one, and this is quite well known. If someone does a huge sigh and then bets, they have a monster hand. So if they go all in, they 100% have it.
Like, don't call that shit.
Unless they've watched this and then they go and play poker with me in the future, and then they know that it's a tell and they do a reverse tell on me. That's a very obvious one.
That's hilarious because, you see, my brain would never go that far, but that's funny. I like that. He's had people. I don't remember who. I remember E.J. Doble. He's an indie author. He painted, and he's like, dude, I don't tell anybody this. And Matt came on with a question about it. So I appreciate you popping in here, Matt. Man, that's always fun.
Is Matt? Does he have He has the YouTube channel as well, does he?
Oh yeah, dude, he's got a big channel.
Cool.
He does. Yeah, Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews. He's got a great channel. Matt, since you popped in, man, I'm sure you've heard of it. Yeah, it's great.
I do. One of my. You'd think I'd have enough of books, but I actually spend a lot of time looking at interviews with writers, but book review sites I love. I love going and seeing all the different ones out there and seeing what they're talking about. But sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're good. So what he does well, that I don't see a lot of people do well, is like those one takes. He'll, like, for instance, I was just watching he does like the top 100, which I could never do. First, I don't think that I could think of 100 fantasy books just because.
And that's exactly the thing I love watching.
yeah. He's, like I say, he's got a pretty big channel too. He's got a great following, and he does it well, man. He goes into it to where, like, when I leave those reviews, I feel like I've got a good sense of whether or not I'd like it. And he also does the Patreon, like, people kind of suggest books to him and he'll read them, whether he's like, I don't really want to or not. He'll dive in, and sometimes he finds those little pieces of gold that he never thought that were there. Other times, sometimes he thinks that gold was gonna be there. It wasn't. So it's cool to see those different contrasts. So yeah, he's got a great channel.
I've thought of a second tell. This is just for Matt. Another reliable one. You ready?
Uh-huh.
This is not quite as reliable as the side, but if you're playing Texas Hold'em and the flop comes out, and you're looking at the other players, and one of the other players sees the flop and then stares at their poker chips immediately, usually they've hit the flop. That's not quite as reliable as the side, but it's pretty reliable.
So it's funny, like, when I say I really enjoy, I mean I really enjoy playing poker. But let me just tell you, if I made that a career, I would be broke so fast because I'm not good at it. But I enjoy the camaraderie. You know what I mean? Just have a cigar, have a drink, hanging out with your buddies. Except in high school, I think my buddy and his dad were like definitely against everybody else. And we're like, hey, they had their little signs and shit. Like, but yeah, no, definitely not. But now that I think back on it, I really enjoyed that. And that's something I might get back into once I maybe do a little bit of research, if I do it seriously, because it's a lot of fun. So I seen, of course, it's right on the front, but how cool to have a blurb from Richard Morgan, author of Altered Carbon. Like, that had to have been so cool. Do you have a relationship with him? Do you talk with him?
I do now, yeah. Like, so this is a cool story for your channel as well, and for people who are aspiring writers. So I read Altered Carbon maybe 15 years ago for the first time, and I wasn't a writer then, and I hadn't thought about being a writer. But I read it, and I'm like, what? It kind of at the time it blew me away, and at the time I was like, look, Cyberpunk still has something to say. I thought, because sometimes people say Cyberpunk is dead. So I thought, oh man, this is such a great novel, and I really enjoyed it. And I thought, and I kind of at that moment, I thought, I'm never going to be a writer, but I do it. I didn't want to do anything like Altered Carbon necessarily, but I wanted to do it in the subgenre, and partly because Altered Carbon it felt to me that that the subgenre still had things to say about the world we're living in now. Anyway, the cool thing is, 15 years later, or 12 years later, he blurbed Neon Leviathan, but he also blurbed 36 Streets. So he's got the cover quote on both. Yeah. And the reason I got in contact with him was from Adrian. Adrian I don't know how he knew him, but must have had some sort of, maybe he did an article by Richard for Grimdark. I don't know what it was, but he knew him very vaguely, and he sent him Neon Leviathan, and Richard answered and said, "I'm probably not going to blurb it. I don't have the time. I'm just warning you. We'll see," type of thing. Because Adrian showed me the email, the exchange. And then he wrote back, and he was effusive. And then he wrote back and said, "This is fantastic. This is brilliant. I want more." And
wow.
And then, so once he said, "I want more," I want to see where he goes with his career. Then I think I got his email through that, and I emailed him and said, "Hey, I wrote 36 Streets. This is my debut. Would you like to read that?" And he's like, "Yes." And so I email him not that often, like once or twice a year, but so I kind of know him through that. It's cool.
That's incredible. Yeah. So you take, somebody that you obviously know is a big name in the cyberpunk, space. And what a cool story, because, kind of gave you that kind of, I don't have a lot of time, this and that, being realistic about it. But then to come back and say, "Oh man, I love it. Give me some more." That must have felt so cool. So I always kind of like to ask this question towards the end of an interview, and it can be anybody, an author, editor, illustrator. It can be a carnival carny, literally anybody. You've heard my interests, and what I have a channel for is to keep learning and get closer to, maybe not closer to anything, but just to continue learning, get closer to that writing experience as intimate as I can by talking to authors, kind of for my, I want to write. And I think that that's very valuable. Who are a few people who, however many, one person, it don't matter, however many people you want to name. Who are those people that you kind of look up to, or you have a relationship with, that you highly suggest I speak with?
Well, I don't look up to him because he's a wanker, but Richard, have you had Richard Swan on your show?
So I did, but right at the beginning of my channel. I need to have him back on now that I've read a couple. He's hilarious.
No, he's good value. Okay, so you've had Richard. A friend of mine, would you have horror writers?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, okay. So a really good Australian horror writer who's kind of a rising star is a guy called Aaron Dries. Have you heard of him?
I have not. AARON GRIES.
Yeah. So Aaron's great. He's written novels, he's written short stories, he's won lots of awards for both. But he also writes scripts, and he's involved in the movie industry as well.
Wow.
At the edges at the moment, but he seems to, every time I hear from him, he's had a new success. So, and he's very funny and charming. So he'd be a great guest.
That would be awesome. Awesome. I'm gonna definitely reach out to him. Man. So I'll tell you what, I often like to do a little bit of a recap, just kind of for me and for you. Things that I've taken from my chat with you, which are very much unique. I will remember this conversation due to these things. Are you speaking about that personal aspect to your writing journey, your very unique experiences as an aid worker. I have to say that must have had some incredible influence to, seeing that part of the human experience for somebody or a culture that we don't get to see very often. Is
Yeah, and I guess I didn't say that clearly. You've obviously picked it up, but of course, that's a massive influence on me in my previous career. Of course, it is, and seeing the dispossessed of the earth, and seeing the culture, and seeing that part of the world, and it's such. So, for example, I did 36 Streets is set in Hanoi. Hanoi is a cyberpunk city. If we're talking about high tech, low life, that's Hanoi now. And I also felt like in a way, living in that part of the world, it feels like the future in the sense of not that it's futuristic. It feels like the future as in this is where the future is going to happen, if that makes any sense.
It does, yes, scarily.
And no, in my work, America has actually collapsed, and America's not big on the world stage anymore. It's China. So sometimes if you spend a lot of time in Southeast Asia, you do wonder if this is where the future is. They talk about the Asian century. So as a science fiction writer, that's a really important what if. What if it is? Okay, what's it look like? And then that's
not far-fetched.
So yeah, you picked up on it, and I didn't say it directly, but yeah, obviously that previous work is a huge influence. Yeah.
So that's what you said specifically about China and the U.S. is that is not a far-fetched thing.
No, unfortunately,
highly influential country, communist country. Yeah, I see more and more of that influence in our government every single day. So that's not something I think that is far-fetched at all. I hope that my kids don't have to deal with that. But, you never know. Man, I just want to lastly say just thank you so much for kind of, we had this reschedule and you've been really patient. And I absolutely plan on, I've got some really fun ideas as far for the rest of the year when I'm done with the planned interviews that I do have in the next couple of months. I've got some really fun ideas that I'd like to reach back out to you about. And I really appreciate you coming on the channel. Let me borrow you, man. I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you.
Well, thanks for the invitation. It's been good. I don't think, as I said before we started, I don't think I've done a streaming before. I've done it with a panel, but I don't think I've done a one-on-one streaming. So this has been good. I haven't passed out or accidentally exposed myself or whatever could happen on live streaming.
It's funny because I always get that say, it's like, I've never done a live before. Oh my God, is the world going to end? No, man, we're just two people talking about things we love. And we often catastrophize as humans, right? And that was one of the things I had to, it was terrifying. Like the first few interviews I did, I was sweating. But I knew to take myself seriously, I had to do it. And man, I'm so glad I did, because what I'm doing, talking to people like you, is just something I'll always remember. I always take those bits of information with me. So again, I want to reiterate, thank you so much for letting me borrow you, talking about your writing journey. Thanks for you guys that were here chatting away, because you're always so wonderful. And those who will watch in the future as well. Tomorrow, who has stolen my audience tonight, they'll watch tomorrow on the replay. But Tori Tekken, man, she's got I forget who the author who did Jade. I can't remember.
Oh, Fonda Lee?
Fonda Lee, yes.
Yeah.
Big epic interview for her tonight. But so happy. I'll have her on the channel tomorrow. That will be fun. So you guys tune in. I believe it's at 8 p.m. tomorrow at Eastern. So yeah, look out for that. And then on the first, I'm going to be talking with the fellas, Richard and Austin from 2 to Ramble. Man, they've got a fun. It's another wonderful booktube site you should check out. Tim, 2 to Ramble.
Sorry, which one?
2, the number 2 to Ramble.
2 to Ramble. Okay.
2 to Ramble. Yep, they've got a great site. So they'll be on the first, and then the absolutely legendary Raymond E. Feist on the second. Man, I can't wait to talk just to the.
Oh, legend. I saw that. Yeah, I'll probably watch that. Yeah.
Super excited.
Yeah, that's cool.
So yeah, be back tomorrow at 8 p.m. Share, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff that I got to say on YouTube. That doesn't just help me, that helps everybody I speak with. And we'll see you next time. Have a wonderful night, afternoon, evening, every guys.
Bye.